Very excited to be here with Peter Sorgenfrei. Peter was himself 6 times founders, and he is now a personal advisor and coach to founders and CEOs to help them to lead a healthier, happier, and more productive life. He supports them to move beyond stress and anxiety to find fulfillment in their personal and professional life. Profile also saw that you work with CEOs, also as a coach, taking them through this journey and transformation. What would you say is the core transformation you create with your clients? The when they join, the stage they're at, and how you see them coming out of it after they've worked with you.
So typically the clients that come to me are in not such a great place in life, right? They are stressed out, they're not sleeping, there might be challenges in their relationship, they have self-doubt, there's issues in the business. I mean, everything is basically a mess. That's typically when they find me and they're like, I got to do something about this. And so once we're done, I've done it now for the last 3.5 years. I've worked with 41, 42 founder CEOs. Once we're done, they get to a state of calm, more reflective on what they want to be in their life, who they want to be when they are at work or when they're at home. So they go from crazy and stressful to hopefully calm and relaxed and reflective.
That's such a beautiful journey and transformation. And it's really wonderful when you're able to see the direct impact throughout the coaching journey and see them come through the other end. And if you were to say like one core pain point, like the most common, biggest struggle that people come for, what would you say that is?
They've lost themselves. I mean, they basically can't recognize the person that they see in the mirror in the morning because they've started to acting and behaving in ways that isn't who they are on the inside. So that's the biggest pain point. I'm not who I want to be or who I'm supposed to be or who I was. How do we fix that? And for everybody, it's individual, right? For some people, it's minor adjustments around sort of tactics in the day-to-day. And for other people, it's like a bigger question saying, well, actually, maybe this is an opportunity to make an even better version of myself.
Yes, I like this idea of who we want to be in the world, how we want to show up. And it's true that in times of extreme stress or extreme pressure, we maybe forget our values or we compromise our health and our relationships. And obviously, that has an impact. I was also reflecting on this before our interview today, and I was thinking, why is it? Why is it that some of us, and many of us, end up overworking? I know your story also began maybe not began, one point of your story where you were overworked. Why do you think it is that some of us put ourselves in situations where we're extremely stressed, overworked, highly pressured? What's that about?
I think because today most people are really passionate about what they do. You know, whether you work for somebody else or whether you work for yourself, like we do. Um, we live in a world where we can allow ourselves to not worry about necessarily getting fed in most countries, in most situations. We don't have to worry too much about finding companionship and love. So we're trying to fulfill ourselves, and a lot of that happens through our work. And so we throw ourselves into it, try to make sure that it's the best it possibly can be. And then it kind of goes to the other edge because work will always take up as much time as we give it. And we don't have that off switch, right? So I don't know if you can recognize this, but you know, we go to work, whether we work from home or not, doesn't matter. But then at some point the workday ends. Does it really end? Or do we actually keep something in the back of our minds? And I think most people do that. And that's how you end up doing it too much and eventually burning out.
It's a fine balance between being passionate about what you do, loving it, putting in your soul, your energy, and at the same time, not getting burnt out through it, not overworking. So, how do you help them to find this sweet balance, still giving your best in your work, showing up, loving what you do, but being able to switch up in the evenings and the weekends, for example?
That's a great question. I think it starts with awareness, right? It starts with understanding I am something that I don't want to be. I have a problem, so to speak, right? So that's where it starts. And for most people, they don't even get there because they're kind of the frog in the pot where we turn on the heat on the water. And before you know it, the frog is boiled, right? But most people actually don't get to that level of awareness. Once they do, what I look at is to say, okay, who is it that you want to be? They described that to me. I said, okay, how do we actually accomplish that? What does that mean? Well, typically for most of my clients, it means being more present where they are. Okay, so that means we need to create some boundaries. A simple trick that I use that I always bring up is leave your phone in the car. And it's because when we come to our home, you could also live in an apartment, you may not have a car, but it's an image of leave that thing behind, both physically and mentally, then you're entering into a new world. So leave your phone in the car means once you step through the doors to your home or when you're with your family, the other stuff is left behind. And just that little mental shift for many people creates the separation they need to be more present at home and create those boundaries.
Yes, being able to totally switch off is such a powerful skill. I'm reading at the moment 10x is easier than 2x by Dan Sullivan. And in it, he talks about having these rejuvenation days. And the more I was reading about it, the more I realized that it is a strength that I was able to take off weekends and not think about work, especially as a business owner. During week evenings, not so much, but weekends I'm able to switch off, which is already fantastic. I'm also curious, when clients come to you, there's obviously the tip of the iceberg, what they see that they're missing or want, which is in this case, they don't recognize themselves. But a lot of the time, all the time, when we coach, there's all this stuff hidden beneath the eye. There's all the stuff they're not aware of, which is holding them back and creating these patterns. What are typically some of the patterns that they're not aware of, but as you coach them, they start to realize this is why they're overworking. This is why they've turned into someone they maybe don't want to be, and they've developed these patterns of overwork and stress.
Now it might get a little uncomfortable for some of the people listening. So fair warning. Typically people come to me thinking they have a business problem, right? They have a management problem. They need to do certain things in the business, but actually they have a personal problem. And so for some of my clients, they essentially hide in the work, right? They hide either physically at the office or they hide mentally in the work from something that they don't want to acknowledge around them. Unfortunately, oftentimes it's about who they are in their personal relationships. They've lost track of their friends. They might have lost their relationship. They might not be as kind to their children or their spouse as they would want to be. But rather than facing that and working on that and fixing that, they sort of go into this land where they're masters of the universe because they can execute on building their business. They know if I put this in, this thing comes out. Whereas the relationships are a little bit harder, right? I think, you told me as we were getting on, you're married, and it's not for us to be a personal story, but we all have that dynamic in our relationship. And we all know when we're kind of hiding from some of the things that we should be addressing. And for many of these startup founders, that hiding place is the work. And so I force them to get to that realization saying, actually, maybe I do need to reconnect with my spouse. I just don't know how. Help me. And so we work on simple things like weekly date nights, or we talk about words of affirmation or the 5 love languages. And we talk about all this other stuff, which when you're a type A personality, triathlon competing cyclist that has raised millions of dollars, you sit down with me and I talk to you about love languages. They're like, what now? But it's what is needed for them to get back on track in their personal life to then be able to get back on track in their professional life.
I've definitely seen that it's a pattern of hiding. Overwork, workaholism is hiding and avoiding something in personal life. So it can be relationships, can also be if someone's single, maybe they want to be in a relationship and they just hide in the work because there's always more to be done, and then they don't have to be so alone in the evening. So that also happens. And just overall as a coping mechanism. But I've also found, and I wonder if you've seen this also, Peter, that I found that people look at work to find external validation that they maybe haven't found within themselves, and sometimes get hooked, especially if they're very successful and they're founders and CEOs, they get hooked on this external validation. And instead of maybe finding this self-worth within them, they're looking for it outside of themselves.
I think that's a very common and natural occurrence, right? We tend to do the things that we're good at, or we tend to do the things that we're rewarded for. And so if I feel confident and good at business and people are starting to recognize my company or recognize me, I'm getting invited to speak on stages and people are asking me questions and stuff, that's a nice environment to be in because I feel like king of the hill. Whereas potentially the relationships or in other areas of my business where I'm not so great, maybe it's people management, maybe it's financial management, other aspects, we tend to shy away from and avoid. So it really is a case of facing your fears or actually going into the stuff that's difficult and finding new and small ways to improve those areas.
Yes, I was thinking about fears before our conversation. I was wondering, what would you say are some of the core fears that drive people to overachieve and maybe get out of this balance and harmony in their life and their work?
Well, there's kind of a pre and a post once you've raised money as you're building a company, right? And not everybody should raise money, and not every company wants to raise money. But what I experience is before you've raised money, your fear is that the thing will never fly. After you've raised money, the fear is that it won't fly fast enough or long enough, right? So you're tying yourself to this plane of some sorts that you don't really control the velocity on or where it's going, and you're putting your faith in that to happen. And that's why you overwork, because you think you can outwork gravity in a sense, right? You can think you can outwork what's happening around you, which of course you can't. So I think that's one of the fears. Another fear, again, they come with that fear thinking, I'm not sure what I'm doing in the business. But the biggest fear is actually, again, losing themselves or losing their relationships. I sat with a founder this morning for a few hours, and he was very clear on the most important thing in his life was his wife and their family. But then we started looking at how he actually spent his time, started looking at how he communicated with them on text messages, started looking at all these different details. And he started crying. He was like, oh my God, I had no idea just how much I've not lived my value and how much I've not done the things that are most important to me. And just that little exercise then caused him to be like, okay, I'm going to fix that right now, clear my schedule, do these things, call my wife, communicate these things, took action. But it's been 3.5 years, right? So, it requires sometimes people like you and I giving them some external input for them to make that change.
Absolutely. And it can be such a eye-opening moment. I really loved when you said earlier that it might make some people uncomfortable when you share the deeper things, because it does sometimes. I also say that sometimes during workshop, because I've realized that people have these sudden realizations and sudden epiphanies, and it's not always very comfortable when you realize that you've been neglecting your relationships or your health, and you're not leading your life as aligned as you would want to.
Mm-hmm.
What is something when you've worked with your clients that has really surprised you? Maybe a pattern that you didn't expect to see and that you didn't anticipate and that came as a surprise to you?
Well, I think the surprising thing is how little it takes for people to start making a change, right? So when I started doing this, so I did this because I was lacking having this as I was building 6 companies. So I knew on my own person kind of what I would have loved to have had, and that's what I then started doing. But what has surprised me is from the time somebody takes the initiative to work with somebody like me or somebody like you, to them actually seeing the effects, that's much faster than I thought it would be. And it's much easier for most people to actually make those changes once they have the awareness. Now, the thing that hasn't surprised me is making that stuff stick, right? So we know what we need to do. We start doing it. We're seeing the effects. But then to continue to do it consistently, that takes much longer than I expected.
Interesting. So faster to begin and then longer for it to stick. That's interesting. And
Old habits die hard, right? I mean, it's that thing that, I know I need to go to the gym to get in shape. And so I start going to the gym in January, and then by February, I'm back on the couch. It's a little bit the same thing with this, where, we like the effects, we know we need to do it, but we're so much on autopilot in our day-to-day that we forget, and then we don't get the effects.
It's a bit of a fresh start effect, like something new, let's go, let's take actions, what make the coach happy, which shouldn't be the aim, but we can't help it, we still care what people think. You mentioned just before this notion of time. For instance, in the case of the founder you were coaching who realized they didn't spend maybe enough time or quite time with their family. How do you feel the relationship with time changes as they work through coaching and through their own transformation?
Well, I think some of them start realizing that time is actually finite. a lot of people in startup land are like, oh, there's enough time, even though there's an urgency. It's like we can just work more at this problem to solve it, and they use more time during the day physically to do it, right? They work 8, 12, 16-hour days. So they start realizing that time is finite. The other thing they start doing is, well, actually, the allocation of, I have enough time. I have plenty of time. I've just allocated it not in accordance with my values. I've spent too much time on stuff that doesn't matter and too little time on stuff that actually matter. So back to some of the stuff that you do is, where do I focus my time? How do I actually make sure that I get to do the things that I want to do? And conversely, what time am I not going to use? What things am I not going to use time on? Doing that, again, we all know we need to do it. We can all sit, everybody who's listening to this right now, look at your calendar. I guarantee you there's stuff on there that you actually don't enjoy doing, that you probably don't need to be doing. So why are you doing it, right? There's plenty of time. We just need to allocate it in accordance with our values.
Absolutely, 200%. And it's an exercise I do every single week. At the end of the week, I look, how did I spend my time? How did I block things out in the calendar? What was aligned? What could have been eliminated or postponed or changed? And you learn a lot and you become a lot more clear on what is taking up too much of, and it's not just time, it's that space, mental space, the energy, the focus, the attention. So how do you help people to realign their priorities? Because sometimes it's hard to let go or delegate or stop doing certain activities if you've been doing this for 5 years. How do you help them to realign?
I think it's a persistence in my questioning, right? So I grew up a little bit corporately with Toyota, and Toyota has this idea of the 5 whys. So you keep asking, why is this thing this way? Well, when you get the explanation, you keep asking why, and you continue that kind of interrogation. And I do the same thing with my clients, which is when they start working with me, they think I'm a pain in the behind, right? Because I insist on understanding why they're doing something and why they're sure that that's the right thing. And for people, again, listening, try to do that with yourself. You don't necessarily need somebody like me or somebody like Katie and to be around. You can do this yourself. Why am I doing this activity? Then you explain it to yourself. Okay, why is that a reasonable explanation? Oh, well, it's because of this, that, and the other reason. You can kind of do that a couple of times. And for most people, certainly my clients, they start realizing, no, actually, I don't need to be doing this, or I don't want to be doing this, so I'm going to make a change. I typically talk about us as coaches not giving people the answers, but helping them trust the answers within, right? So we all need, you and I, same in our lives, we know what we need to do, but there's a reason we don't do it. Having somebody help us figure out what that reason is and then resolve it is actually what coaching is all about.
It's so powerful. So many times people think they need someone out there to tell them what to do, to tell them what the next step is. But we know what it is. It's always, what's the blockage? Is there a limiting belief? Is there self-doubt? Is there the fear of failure? And addressing that with someone external, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Peter. I've worked with a lot of different coaches. It helps so much. You transform so much when you see more clearly the things that are holding you back from progressing.
Indeed. And I think the next thing that people like us provide, and maybe that's where all the value is a sense of accountability, right? So my clients know that every single week and in between, I'm going to be asking them about the things that they're working on. And they won't be happy if they didn't do it and they have to have me in the horn saying, why didn't we do this, right? So if you're considering working with a coach and you're out there, I think an important thing to look for or think about is, how will this person make sure that I actually stay on track? Not give me the answers, but help me do the things that we agree on doing. How are they going to do that in a day-to-day? Because that's what, in my experience at least, is paramount for success.
Absolutely. And I read in one of your articles that you talk about hustling is for losers. So can you tell us a bit more about this? Why this anti-hustling, which I 200% agree on, but yeah, again, we do very similar things in a similar process. So it's not surprising we've got a similar perspective on this. So I'd love to hear, why is hustling for losers?
It's like, oh, we need to go to war. We need to kill this. We need to kill that. I crushed it. I mean, first of all, the language around entrepreneurship and startups is too much like two bros standing in a bar and talking about this, right? So I have that problem with it. And the second thing is, it is hard work to build a company. It is hard work to be an entrepreneur. Of course it is. But it doesn't have to be a hustle. It doesn't have to be something where you have to kind of bend, cheat, be a little something you're not. It is entirely possible to build very valuable companies, having a regular schedule, being focused, being organized. The biggest problem, and now I'm playing into your hand, Katie, is focus. The biggest reason I think a lot of entrepreneurs feel like they need to hustle is because they're trying to do too much for too many people in too many places. If they would just focus a little bit more, doing one thing well for one customer at one time, then they'll be successful. And I see we have some questions from somebody who actually is doing some of that. So that's an interesting segue potentially.
Interesting. So I see. How do you deal with the worry that you'll miss the fires burning or your messages or something? So yes, how do you, when you take on so many different projects, deal with the worry of maybe missing out on something? Because I think that's also partly why people go into hustling.
It is, and I want to give a shout out to the questionnaire, which is Mitchell Tan, who's built something called Condo, which is a way of handling your messages in LinkedIn. So thank you for that, Mitchell. Brilliant software. I think he asked this question around me saying, leave your phone in the car, right? And the thing you need to realize is there is very, very little in life that you need to know about right now. There's very, very little life that you cannot wait on getting that message. The only thing I'd argue is if somebody near and dear to you is dying and you need to get to the hospital or giving birth or, some event like that. Yeah. And so there's nothing pretty much in your work life that you need to worry about, because if I'm a customer of Mitchell's, for example, and I have some issue and I write him about it, will I be okay if he tells me in 8 hours once he wakes up? Probably. Will I be okay if he tells me in 12, 15 hours? Most likely. Would I love for him to get back to me at all hours? Yes. But it is not necessary for him to build a successful company. It's all about expectations. If the expectations are, like you'll see in many customer service chats now, we respond typically within 12 hours. Okay, now I know what to expect. Then when they answer within 3 hours or 10 hours, I'm like, oh, that's exciting. That's good. So it's about expectation management. You do not need to be on at all times. You do not need to respond to all emails immediately. You do not need to pick up the phone at all times. It is not necessary to build a successful business, but it is necessary to build a successful life that you're not constantly tethered to the demands of others' attention.
It's like somehow along the way we've forgotten the importance of protecting our own space and life from the invasion of work. And it goes in our thoughts and in our devices. And it's so powerful when you're able to separate both. I also saw there was a question around the difference between coaching and therapy. How would you formulate that in a nutshell, Peter?
So in a nutshell, I don't think you're a psychologist, but I certainly am not a psychologist by background. So there are certain things about the human mind and how we go into the world that I don't have the academic background to actually help you on. So I think the key difference is coaching helps you find the answers within, but it doesn't necessarily explain exactly why you may feel that way, right? So I don't persist to be able to say, you know what, client, the reason you have this is because you had a troubling relationship with your parents and because of all these things. I don't have the theoretical underpinning to do that. A therapist would be. A therapist could also deal with things like substance abuse or other mental related illnesses. I can't. So what happens in my world, what happens with a coach, if one of my clients start talking to me about some kind of addiction or something else that is happening, I refer them to a specialist. I would refer them to a therapist. A coach should not touch any of those topics.
Absolutely. And I also tend to think that coaching is forward thinking. What are your goals? Where do you want to go? What would you like to achieve? or a therapist might look a bit more to the past and see a little more while we're stuck on certain obstacles and traumas. Amazing. And so, if we're looking now at the transformation that we said at the beginning to help them to get more calm and grounded, what do you feel are certain tools and strategies that they put in place that we can maybe share here to help people who are maybe currently going through a phase of overwhelm, overwork, maybe close to burnout? What would be two, three things they can put in place to help them to find more calm, presence, peace in their life?
So I think this is very generalized advice, right? So I don't know the specific of anybody listening, but typically it starts with getting a handle on yourself, right? So being good with yourself. And so getting the fundamentals right, which are around sleep. Are you sleeping enough? If not, that needs to be fixed. That's kind of number one. Number two is, are you getting enough movement and nutrition into your day? Number three is, how are your personal relationships? Are you good with your spouse, your partner, your parents, your kids, whomever is in your life and whoever matters to you from that perspective? So those are the first things I would focus on, getting a handle on yourself and getting a handle on your personal relationships. Tips and tricks, I would start with sleep, movement, nutrition. Am I doing that right? And then I would go to relationship with others. I talk about meditation a lot. That's not for everybody. For me, it's been wonderful. It's done great things for many of my clients. I talk about cold water exposure. I know it's the new black. I'm wearing black today, so fitting. And I look a little bit like Wim Hof now with this beard. But again, for me, it's done wonders for my mind and for my body to go in the ocean every single day. So that's another thing. And I think the third thing is, talk to somebody, right? Don't struggle alone. Whether it's a coach, whether it's a good friend, open up and share what's going on with you. Chances are most people will catch you and help you and talk to you about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Peter. This has been so valuable. It's so interesting to hear the transformation from your perspective and to hear the main points that people can focus on, the tools they can think about, and just having that perspective of, let's look at really what's happening here, not hide in our work, actually look at the different areas in our life and start taking actions to create more balance, more harmony, more joy also in our lives. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thanks for having me.